All right, Randy, we are live and ready. I don't see Henry pulling up at all. So I don't know if you want to get started or you want to wait a little bit longer.
I guess um, I guess we can go ahead and get started, and then we can catch him up when he comes.
All right. So whenever you're ready, you want to call it to order.
Yes, it's 6:02, and I'd like to call this session of the Seldovia Planning Commission on July 2nd to order. And if the clerk could call the roll.
Commissioner Ryan. Here. Commissioner Forsberg.
Here.
Commissioner Sweet.
Here.
And Commissioner Kroll is currently absent.
Thank you. And then I'd like to have a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve.
And could I have a second?
I'll second that.
And if the clerk could call the roll, please.
Commissioner Ryan.
Yes.
Commissioner Forsberg.
Yeah.
And Commissioner Sweet.
Yes.
We have 3 yeas and 1 absent.
And then if I could get a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you. And could I have a second?
Yes, I will second them.
And if the clerk could call the roll, please.
Commissioner Ryan.
Yes.
Commissioner Forsberg.
Yes.
And Commissioner Sweet.
Yes.
That is 3 yes and 1 absent.
So thank you. The minutes have been approved, and the public comments regarding items not on the agenda. Is there anyone from the public that would like to make a comment?
There is not at this time, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. And then we do not have any public hearing prior notice in this meeting.
Correct.
And any consideration of site plans?
There are none, Madam Chair.
Okay, and so we'll go ahead to item H, commission business. And this is regarding the ordinance 25-09. And I would like to, I understand that City Manager Gagel will be providing a presentation on the finishing items for this agenda item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is a revised draft for the discussion at the previous city council, or sorry, previous planning commission meeting from your guys' meeting last month. I did do a memorandum regarding those changes, and that's on page 7. Nope, sorry, 6. Starts on page 6 of your laydown that just kind of walks through a brief history of this process from the, starting with the most recent, that May 14th, 2025, the Seldovia City Council held a work session pertaining to draft ordinance 2509 version 5 that was referred to the council by the Seldovia Planning Commission from your guys' March 3rd, 2025 regular meeting. That draft ordinance was initiated by the Seldovia Planning Commission in response to recommendations provided by a Seldovia Planning Commission Commercial Business District Subcommittee after a 7-month review of municipal code regarding the commercial business district. The draft ordinance was reviewed and amended by the Seldovia Planning Commission over a series of 8 commission meetings and recommended to the Seldovia City Council for adoption at the commission's March 5th, 2025 meeting. So it's been a long process, but I think that shows due diligence. And we'll see if all of the changes from the city council have been addressed. Potentially And I did make note of those below, those changes that they requested at that May 14th, 2025 meeting. Quite a bit of it had to do with the administrative permit. I did have a section in yellow because those pieces are still open on the docket. City Clerk Diamond is working on updating that city website like we've discussed. However, we have addressed the administrative permit piece with that new section on administrative approval and permits in Title 18. The dwelling definitions were updated to better reflect residential status. Language was added to lodging, long-term residential, that if it was in the commercial business district, an administrative permit was required. Language is also included in the setback definition that they shall not allow snow to shed on public or private property. And updated language was included for this commercial business district incidental uses building coverage. That includes, as well as we included a chapter header in section 4, just to make that cleaner in the ordinance. That's section 4 of the draft ordinance. And address storage facility secondary use in the district. So that was the things that the council requested at your guys' June 4th meeting. You were able to take care of most of them, as I just had mentioned. You'll see that at the bottom of page 6. And those were all the items discussed at that June 4th Planning Commission meeting. And then on page 7 are the things that we're discussing tonight. Below the summary of changes for version 7 are the previous changes made, just so we can kind of have them all together. And should this become a finalized copy, I can send this memorandum forward with the draft ordinance to the council for a work session here in the near future, so that they can also see and track those changes. So starting with summary of changes version 7, the draft ordinance is in your regular packet, page 5. It's kind of nice because you can have both documents open if you're using paper documents. I don't know how well it works for Randy. And fantastic, Miss Liz did share the screen, so thank you, Clerk Diamond. I took off all of the yellow from the previous discussions and just yellowed the new items, or the items for discussion this evening. So the first one you'll see is on page 11. There was a little bit of work, additional work that was needed for dwelling. When looking at the land use table, it was discussed at the last meeting that dwelling, large apartment complex, or dwelling units that are larger than duplex, triplex, or fourplex, still needed to have a definition. So put that in there. As dwelling, large apartment complex residence, 5 or more units, use or building on a lot containing 5 dwelling units as a residence for long-term rentals. See lodging, long-term residential rentals. For short-term accommodation rental units, see lodging, hotel, motel. In order to provide that, the distinguishing characteristic of, is it a residence or is it a business? So if it's a business, go to a different definition, depending on what type of business you're operating, either as a long-term or a short-term rental, and then adding in examples of dwelling units that are less than 5 units on the dwelling multifamily residential, and that's duplex, triplex, and fourplex. It was suggested perhaps like listing them out and having the subsection underneath. And so if you guys want more of a definition for those items, I could do, duplex, triplex, fourplex, A, B, C under item 29. But I just left it this way at this point for this discussion. So you guys tell me if this works. It's helpful if you go back and look at that land use table, which was kind of the catalyst for putting that back in there, because we did have that separation of 4 or less units and 5 or more units, and that does have a lot to do with commercial building codes. And the requirements are different for those types of, for those size buildings. So making sure that that was still in there, because it was in there before for the 5 or more. And then the 4 or more is the dwelling multifamily residential. Dwelling single family is for a one family unit. and then dwelling unit attached residential for those buildings that are not a primary residence or that have another use, like a commercial use, but also have an attached residential. And that's on page 29 of that land use table. If you want to look at that, and I did yellow those so that you can see those changes. I will note though that these uses were already in here just under different language. For instance, I'm looking at the old one. The dwelling unit attached multi-residential apartment in a commercial building, dwelling unit structures containing 4 or less, dwelling unit structures containing 5 or more, and those land use types, whether it's permitted, conditional, secondary, are the same as the previous language that's in there. So the permissions remain the same, but the language and the name changed. And we included dwelling single family, which we did not have before. So if that makes sense. Any questions on that? Okay, I'll move on page 13 of the ordinance. We reinstated junkyard and lumberyard per the request of the commission. So that is just put in yellow. That's a definition that was already in the code. So instead of taking it out, it's staying in. Same language as was in there. And then same with on page 14, lumberyard. And then also you can see that on the land use table again on page 29, junkyard, lumberyard is back in on that land use table for the example or the draft to be reenacted. So they are in there now. They stay in there. I yellowed them just to show that that's a change from the last copy, but it's not new because it's something that's existing in code at this point. I'll note on page 30 of the land use table, change under lodging, long-term residential rental, that P, before it was I think it was like a not permitted, but Commissioner Ryan pointed out that is in the residential special multi district. And so that is what they do is long-term residential rentals. So that says permitted. And then also below that under manufacturing, fabricating, assembly, updated those land use types under waterfront commercial, residential, and commercial to conditional use instead of not permitted and permitted, to match what was previously, because now this category, jumping ahead a little bit, is only seafood processing. Since lumber yard and junkyard is out there, so it's only large scale seafood processing. And this was the previous or what is it? This is the existing current use for that seafood processing is that it on a large scale that it is a conditional in the waterfront commercial and commercial. So not changing that, keeping it the same unless you guys want to make that commercial district definition looser and make that waterfront commercial residential more restricted for that type of a large industry. The small scale custom is still in there and seafood processing on a small scale. It does say that in the definition. And to see manufacturing, fabricating small scale, and that is permitted in both those districts. So I would really appreciate feedback from you guys on that, if you want them to be, if you want that large scale to be conditional in those two districts, or if you want it to be more or less restricted. And then I guess I'll just jump into the last bit of it, and then we can go back to that discussion or any other discussion you have. There was a question about eliminating some of the language in the definition for school if it was necessary. I did do a little research on that on page 19, and I highlighted it even though I left it in there the same. There are regulations regarding marijuana shops, certain types of offenders, and then also following state language and code or statute that does specify age and grade for those schools, because there are some regulations that relate directly back to that public education or private or any kind of education for those minor children. So we can change the language if that's not meeting the exact needs. But I do think that it is valid to have something that denotes that we're talking about children, or individuals who are under 18 and their places of learning. And then the last thing is that it was requested that we remove any of the double headers. So the header word for the definition, and then the word again in quotations and means. So I went through and also hopefully successfully completed that task. And those are the changes that came out of that last discussion. So happy to hear from you guys, your feedback and where to go from here.
I have a comment on the school. Do we need to have a higher education category then? I mean, another like primary school versus secondary school or something? I don't know. Do we need to define another use, or? I mean, because you could still have a school for adults. And I don't know if it's a problem. Does it need to be?
I wonder if that would just fall under a service and would be considered a business general because it doesn't have those extra restrictions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like a bar falls under.
Oh, that's a school.
Well, I'm just saying that falls under retail.
Yeah, I know.
That question, like,
Yeah,
is
I
a
get
bar not in there? It's like,
So
well,
that makes sense to
retail.
have it's a service.
Yeah, it's a service.
Yeah. Okay.
Unless something comes up that's, crazy and needs to be called out, and then absolutely.
And
We
then
can
the
do
other
that.
one-
Or if you guys feel there's a need for it, then we can do that.
Seafood thing.
So this is Randy. I just as far as general feedback, it seems like what you've done has directly addressed the remaining items, and I would support those, the changes and the way they've been done. I think the using the conditional use just gives some flexibility in terms of, or it helps us, I really look at what the situation is so that it is a good fit in whatever district it is in. And I guess that's the purpose of the conditional use is to give the city an option to evaluate if it works in the particular district. And I guess it would also allow the community to give feedback in that same situation. And that's all I had.
I had one clarifying question, if I may. For junkyard, was part of the discussion at the last meeting that was to be conditional in the districts?
So right now in the existing code, it's not permitted in any district except for in commercial and industrial where it is permitted. So if you guys want to call out and make that change, we can put that in there.
I could be misremembering that from the last meeting.
Yeah, I remember a discussion for having more conditional uses, but I'm kind of glad to see less myself. Less conditional uses. It seems like commercial and industrial zoning are meant for those kind of uses instead of being conditional. Yeah.
I had, one comment about the direction of construction of a communication tower with a height not to exceed 35 feet. Is that just for personal towers, or is that the big one?
So that's the next discussion. I think you jumped ahead in ordinance.
So this is Randy. Um, I, I was just looking at the, in the notes, and it says there was discussion on junkyard and lumberyard, grouping the industrial together and putting junkyard underneath industrial. It was suggested that junkyard be conditional where instead of permitted in commercial and industrial. Commission agreed by consensus to make junkyard conditional and lumber yard would be pulled out on its own. So that's on page 4 of the notes, I believe. Or I'm not, at any rate, that's in our notes. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, so that was the minutes from the prior meeting, from our last meeting. So I just wanted to bring that up in case that was the commission's desire to still have that, or if you want to keep it at permitted.
Now, I would defer to the group. I just wanted to let you know what we said before. So I'm just checking in. How should we go forward with this then?
Well, if that's a consensus of the council, or sorry, the commission to leave it as it is for now, I did have another question that came up when I was writing this memorandum, and that is that another item that the Seldovia City Council had requested, there was quite a bit that circled around this administrative permit, which has been separated out now to administrative approval and administrative permit, which makes sense depending on the process that is required for that land use type. But one of the things that they had asked for was that to ensure that those administrative permits were non-transferable. I did include in the packet on page 31 the long-term residential rental permit, which is the only active administrative permit at this time. And I had a question about that. And I can save it and ask it of the council if that makes more sense. But if you guys have feedback on whether these long-term residential rental business permits would be non-transferable if somebody sold a property that was already acting as a long-term residential rental and there was a wait list. I could see there being a conundrum if there was a wait list and then somebody bought that property or business with the intent of it being a rental, but wasn't able to do it because somebody on the wait list was able, they moved up the list and that business that permit wasn't being able to transfer with the business. And I was wondering if you guys had feedback on that, or perhaps I'm thinking too in depth about that, but it seems like that if the intention is for that business to remain through the transfer of sales, and the permit should transfer with it. It's not currently a problem right now, but I believe the council brought it up because it, potentially it could be in the future. We don't have a wait list right now. I believe we have one open permit even, but just trying to think through if you guys have a response on whether or not this permit should be transferable.
So this is Randy. If instead of it being transferable, could it be that the person would have the right to apply for a similar permit that so that they wouldn't be prevented for it if there was irrespective of the wait list, just so that basically they could take advantage of the prior permit, because I guess it shouldn't, in terms of how many items or how many businesses, it would remain the same, because the permit that was active would end with the person who had it, and then the new owner could apply for basically a replacement permit because they were going to be operating a similar business in the location. Does that make sense, or does that help?
Yeah, just thinking about how to word that.
Yeah.
But
Maybe the new owners should be aware of what the permit is and sign off on it, the existing one. And then carry on from there. If the permit's still open of the old owner, and the new owner's gonna come in and finish the build or whatever. As long as he's aware of what the permit permits. Should be, as long as he signs off on it.
So does this mess up if there's a waiting list, it's the only.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's people that are currently wanting to have a long-term residential rental.
There isn't right now, but if there was, and you had one of these properties sell, and that new property owner bought it with the intention to have that permit, because that's how that's being used. But they would go to the bottom of the wait list, right? So then the next person up, and that would, I don't
Yeah.
think that will work
No.
for a business or a potential prospective business.
It seems like it should be transferable or in
But then
some fashion.
Does one get off the wait list?
Somebody stops using it as a business. It says on here, if a long-term residential rental is with a lapse of 6 months or more, and tenants will no longer be considered a long-term rental and must obtain a new administrative permit in order to be considered. It is to limit the amount of long-term residential rentals in that district, right? So you don't, it's not that you don't want, 4 or 5 or 6 springing up in the whole district. But it does seem like if you're prohibiting somebody from who's buying property, that's how it's being used, to be able to continue to use it, and then you let somebody new in the district use it, then you're creating potentially more spaces in the district that are developed for that use, and prohibiting that individual or corporate, whoever it is, from that new property owner from being able to continue it's a little sticky, I guess is all I'm trying to say, is that perhaps it should be transferable.
Yeah, I think it should be, it's in some fashion,
Yeah,
and it should be,
at least like a preferential first right or something.
yeah.
So something like you maybe, if the residence is for sale, maybe able to apply for a transfer of that permit if it is occupied at the time of sale. Or intends to be occupied within 6 months, let's say. Something like that.
I would imagine that there's possibly a legal mechanism for doing it, where the person, because the permit is issued to an individual, and so the individual leaves with the sale. The new person would have to have a new permit, but you're saying in effect that there's continuity of the business, that if it's sold and the same type of business is going to continue, that the new owner would have the right to operate that business and would just need to complete a permit form so that their information so everything was documented and the permit was associated with the new owner.
Yes, and also there is a scenario where people buy a building as well as the existing business, which the permit does go with the business. It is a business, so the permit isn't necessarily to an individual, it's to a business.
Okay. But okay. So it could be the same business, or one person closes their business and the next person opens a new business with the same I forget the code, the same
Land
code of business.
Yeah.
You know how business licenses are issued with a particular code, and if it's the same,
Yeah.
I guess it would be the same code. So how do we resolve this, like today, in terms of what do we need to do so that it can move forward? Or
Well, with the exception of that, which I can work on because there's a few other edits that are needed to this permit anyways to go with this draft ordinance. So if you guys are satisfied with the draft ordinance the way it is, you can make a motion and refer it or recommend it, I should say, back to the Seldovia Planning Commission to review. And then they can review it in a future work session.
you mean the city council?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry,
And are we able to make a decision like that, given that we have 3 people?
Yes, yep. The one where you
Okay.
need majority plus one is for variances and conditional uses. So that is
Okay.
that's not this type of business.
Hi.
So
That's a good idea.
So at this point, are we at a point where we should call the question as far as approving the ordinance, or recommending the ordinance go to the city council as it is?
I think so. Should I make a
Okay.
motion saying that we move that this ordinance be forwarded to city council for review?
Thank you. And could I have a second?
Yes, second it.
And if the clerk could call the roll?
So the motion is to recommend this ordinance be moved to city council
For review.
for review.
And it meaning that the changes that have been provided to the planning commission are agreed upon and they would go over to the city council.
So Commissioner Ryan? Yes. Commissioner Forsberg
Yes,
and Commissioner Sweet?
Yes.
That would be 3 yeas, Madam Chair.
And so then so that item is complete for as far as the agenda is concerned, and we're moving on to the building zoning permits. Item number 2. And Heidi, I believe, the city manager will present that information.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So this still needs a lot of work. It's a pretty rough draft, but I did want to provide an example that we are working on it. And this has been discussed a few meetings ago. And so there was an initial short draft of what the code could look like if it was expanded a little bit more. And we did reference Homer's code for that, Homer's zoning code. And I believe that example is still in your packet from Homer well, there's a memorandum on page 43 that talks about update and recommendations for including topographical impacts in the building permit process, and then shows zoning permit for Homer after that on page 45. And then they also have a site plan slopes and coastal development, which we did not include, and a site development standards, which I did include. And that one's kind of nice because it talks about like the specifics to the site development plan, which we haven't really ever called out before. And that's what we're asking for when we ask somebody to draw a site plan to go with the permit. And then a development activity plan, which I have not made my way through yet to see if that's something that would be applicable or not, but is called out in the potential revision. As well as a stormwater plan, which also seemed maybe excessive for the community that we're in now. And then on page 62 is the existing building permit, and the laydown is a really rough draft of our building permit updated to include some of these expanded measures as provided in the Homer City Code. And you can see their example of their permit application on page 70. So it's a lot of information. If there is any initial feedback from the commission, I would love it at this time. And I have a few questions that I can run through. But certainly this is still very rough in order of magnitude. And not anywhere near a finished product. So for instance, if we start on page, it's hard to read the numbers with the other numbers underneath it. 33, late fees didn't make it into the revised ordinance, so I just put a star that needs to go in to the new application or to the new code. And then and then you'll see that I want to call out that the building permit process itself, as it is now, is 1704-020, and it's 4 paragraphs, and maybe that's applicable and that's what is needed. However, it was kind of nice to see in this expanded version, which it's expanded because we're including more activities than just structures. Right, that's been the discussion. If we go back in time, this discussion started with a desire to have some way um, of noting and making sure that safety protocols and um, any regulations needed are being followed for other types of development happening on properties. So if they're removing buildings, if they're removing large amounts of material, putting up restraining walls, just the different things that have occurred. Removing a lot of vegetation, so that changes the runoff and the drainage and is eroding neighboring properties. I mean, these are some of the things that we've seen in the last couple of years that have not been previously addressed through this permit process. So through this expansion, it does, and it calls it out in the building permit. Well, it calls it out in the building permit required, that, one, it's an erection, construction, or moving of any building or structure. Two, site development activities that require review or approval under the Seldovia zoning code, such as, but not limited to, an excavation and fill activity, stormwater protection activity, decks and docks to be constructed into a body of water, other developmental activity plans, or the activities that require a site plan. So that's a little convoluted. Like I said, we're still working through that process. But an increase and I think we can make it more straightforward to what this community needs or is working through. And then number 3 is an increase in height or an exterior dimension of any floor of an existing building, or an increase in the height or the footprint area of an existing structure, which is something we already have. Removal of any building or structure, we don't have that. But a smaller structure, maybe that's not applicable, but if they're moving a large, like a home or a business, that's something that Public Works has pointed out, that would be nice to have a check on that to make sure that utilities are properly closed off and taken care of. And so, maybe this isn't the applicable place, but it seems like it's a good way to tie that in, and maybe we can make that so it's not, you don't need a full site plan for that, but you do need to have a removal plan that includes or shows that you're properly closing utilities. I'm not sure about that yet. Which, like I said, still work in progress. So love any feedback. And then, as Commissioner Forsberg pointed out, I left it in yellow because this was from Homer City Code, and I don't know if that's something that you guys want to exempt. Currently, a communication tower. I believe that they had a variance. Do you remember, Clark Diamond? Have you seen that in the file? How to get that tower, there was a process.
I think it was a variance.
I think it was a variance.
Yeah.
But I don't believe they had to have a building permit because their square footage wasn't because we look at the layout, not the height. So that's something to consider, is if you guys want right now, the way this sits, the way it is in across the bay, is that an erection or construction of a communications tower with a height not exceeding 35 feet, or an amateur radio tower, I think like a ham radio or something of that nature, would be exempt, and they don't need a building permit. So something to think about. Something else that we talked about is that potentially moving from a zoning permit to a building permit, because that's really what we're addressing more, is zoning. However, and working through this process, I did backtrack that and didn't include that at this time, because I wanted to just talk about that a little bit more with you guys and get your guys' feedback on concerns that if it was a zoning permit, people might not necessarily know that they need it for a building, because that's where that's been the history of the community. So keeping it as a building permit, but expanding that, for other types of developmental construction, seems like that might be a little bit of a smoother transition for the community. So I'd love feedback on that. And then really, on the next page, under 1704-050, another new thing that was referenced in the other code was a building permit for a building or structure shall require the applicant to submit an as-built survey once that building has been completed. We don't require that, but there has been talk about how as-built survey would be beneficial. That might be outside of contractors or a person who's developing in the community's capabilities at this point. I'm not really sure. I don't have a great check on that. But that could be a start, is to request an as-built once the work is done. And that's a great way to check to make sure that they did follow through. That's an issue we've had, and we've talked about a checklist. And having city staff actually going out and verifying that people are building to the height they say, or the setbacks they say, because that has been a kind of a continuing theme of there's a looseness that if somebody gets a building permit and then they go and build, that onus is on them to follow through with what they said, but there's no check to make sure that things haven't gone askew, that they're not building over property lines or height. And I think most people are genuinely trying to do their best, but an as-built could be a great solution instead of, or in addition to, a staff checklist that just has that extra layer of protection that, yes, that property was, or that construction was completed. But it is a, it's another requirement, another burdening task on a developer. So something to think about.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that could be done by the property owner rather than a licensed surveyor, because that's where the expense comes in if you have to hire a
So maybe they do the checklist and verify.
Yeah, but then there's how many
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
I can see why it's good to have a third party involved.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or setback check. I mean, that's something we've talked about. Instead of doing a full as-built, they can do a setback check at least, and that's a smaller expense, and at least that's verifying property lines, so an impact to neighboring properties. But we have had a few complaints about on multiple different properties about potentially going beyond the height that they have stated, or the size.
Maybe.
So this is Randy. One of the things that, as you're talking, what I'm thinking about is perhaps when the structure is framed, that is the time that you want to check the height, because after the roof is on and after everything has been done, if it's out of compliance, trying to fix that is not an easy thing. If somebody genuinely made a mistake, or if somebody is taking liberties, it would seem like a point in time where checking it, where it's adjustable at that point, would be the time to check the height and size. Does that make sense?
It does. And so just making sure that there's that communication point with staff, that before things are framed in, or when they're framed, but before they're finished,
Right.
that staff are able to access that property and verify, like a midpoint
Right.
check.
Right. And so it would just be a milestone that they would have on I guess it would need to be on the building permit, and that they would verify that, yes, it is the right size and it's in the right, and it has been placed on the property, according to the setbacks and everything else, so that that it's being done according to the permit.
Yeah. Maybe a city worker could be trained up to do the initial checkout, instead of bringing somebody over to
Mhm.
look at it. That might be a way to go.
We can work on that.
And because at this point, sorry, this is Randy. At this point, are there fairly easy means of verifying like height and position on the property to do just a, a check like that?
Yes and no. I mean, we do
Okay.
go with tape measures and check things out, and there are scopes that you can do a height with. There are tools available, but without a survey or property lines that are clearly delineated, it does become more of estimate than if you had a survey or an as-built. So, I think that that's fine as long as the estimate show, errs on the side of caution. But then, potentially if it's too close to call, then maybe that's when you bring in the third party.
And I mean, this is just my personal perspective. I think having a midpoint check like that just to know what's going on, I would not be averse to having an as-built at the end of the project. That I think that could be a positive thing for all concerned, but I'm curious to know what other people thought.
You could leave it open-ended maybe, and that person has the option. It's in code that they either have a regular midpoint and a final check by staff for verification, or they provide an as-built at the end of the project. And you just put that on the application, and that individual can make that choice if they want somebody to come over and do that verification through it, and then at the end,
Okay.
or if they would rather provide that as-built at the end to make it clear. I'm just, talking and thinking.
And
Yeah,
what
yeah.
would be the remedy if they're out of compliance? Like, is it set of like, oh, you got to cut your roof off now, or have, yeah.
Yeah,
Typically, then they need a variance
Okay.
potentially, and then that would that has a public notice process with their fellow neighboring property owners.
Right.
But maybe that provides some incentive to ensure that and support through the project, because they have that support from staff
Mhm.
to come and can help and look if that's needed. And I would like to
So-
note that Commissioner Kroll has joined us.
Thank you.
The other new thing, well, there's a bunch of new, I mean, this is new. Another notable item in yellow below that is that there's a permit public display. That's not something that we've required. I know that larger areas do that. I don't know that, I mean, we know when construction's happening, but we do get a lot of questions on whether people have permits or not, which is helpful because sometimes that's not the case. But maybe if there was a requirement that the permit was on display, then that would eliminate some of that questioning. But that also might be something, that people are not used to and might feel burdensome. I'm not sure, I think there's value to it, but how does that value weigh out with existing practices?
I think that's a great idea. And then that section B under there is talking about people having to then enter somebody's private property to look at that permit, but it could be posted at someplace where it's really close to the property line.
Mhm.
I think it's good to, yeah, because you're saying you don't know if somebody's gotten their permit and something's happening. So that would be a good way to alleviate that question.
Okay. And then if we move on to flip our page to where it begins, chapter 18.66. This is all new. We don't have
So-
site developments. Sorry, yes.
This is Randy. I just, before we go into the, to the section 18, I just wanted to, so on, I have a couple of comments. So on line item 97, it should just be require instead of requirement.
Good catch.
And on 124 to 125, on the communication tower, my question is it something that the community should be aware of? So if they want to weigh in on it, that they actually have an opportunity for feedback? Because if I understood, I can just say the communication tower that went in, I did not, and I can see it from my property. I did not have any notice that I could comment on it, or that it was, I didn't really understand that it would be visible from my property. So I'm just kind of wondering, when those things come up, it would be helpful to know what its impact on the sort of on the environment, in terms of just the visual environment. And I don't think we have anything like that in the way we look at building at this point. I don't think there's anything that has to do with view or that type of circumstance. So it's just food for thought, and what's happened, what I experienced before. Then there's on 280, line item 284, it talks about the city manager revoking a permit, and I was wondering what the process was. And there's an appeal process, but to whom and how. So just as this is developing, just those would be some of my questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, that's why that's in yellow, but I didn't necessarily call it out because has not been, we do have an appeal process, as you guys are aware, in Title
Right.
18. However, there's been some internal discussion about adjusting that appeal process to allow the designation of a what's the words I'm looking for, Clerk Diamond?
Administrative hearing officer.
An administrative hearing officer instead of a full panel. And that is definitely a discussion that should be held in the future that would, coincide with this, but hasn't happened yet.
Okay. And then the last, and again, these are just, reactions to just reviewing it once. So the last one I have on line 336, and it has to do with the drainage plan. And so that I think that the city manager can approve a drainage plan, and I was wondering what kind of standards the city manager would use in that approval, and then kind of the genesis of all of this stuff is, one of the concerns is runoff from, when things get changed, and runoff ends up affecting another property to prevent that. So just, and I didn't see anything that addressed that specifically yet. So that just kind of a flag on that particular issue.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I do, that's the intent there. It does say on that line 38 and 39 that it is designed to deposit all runoff into either an engineered drainage system, so like the city system, or into a natural drainage. But yes, definitely could use some more attention. Like I said, these are very rough. If you go back to your questions on the communication tower, if you don't mind quickly, I do have more questions on that. We don't have a fully vetted process. So would it be worthwhile bringing some information from other communities forward and potentially considering including something in our ordinances specifically referencing communication towers, whether that's on the land use table or on its own section? Is that something that you guys would like to see?
Yeah, I had it on the zoning of construction of a tower. Is there restrictions by the airport?
There are FAA restrictions, which is why they had a really hard time getting that tower where it is.
Yeah.
Because there's not a lot of places in town where you can place a tower. It's very limited.
And it's too short.
Yeah.
Well, there are also regulations on how tall it can be.
Yeah.
When, what is the height here would be from the ground? Like if you put it on top of your roof, it would include the building height would. Okay, so we don't have that defined, the tower. It's not 35 feet from the top of your roof, I would hope. But I would think overall 35 feet would basically be doubling the height of your structure, and it seems more reasonable. Right? Because you can have 2 stories. It's how much 2 stories are, but with a roof, it gets tall. Anyhow, the tower that got built is much taller than 35 feet. Yes.
Seems like maybe there's some more vetting that needs to be done on this. If you guys would like a future discussion on communication towers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds like a good idea.
Need about 3 of them.
3 what?
Towers.
Or maybe a fiber optic cable.
And-
Okay. And then yes, the site development standards is new as well, and as also a rough order of magnitude. But there's there's a lot of room for improvement, but just kind of a general idea of further clarifying when you're talking about excavation, fill, those types of site development activities outside of construction, what those requirements are. So a general topic on site development, and it does mention that all exposed, cleared, filled, and disturbed soils shall be revegetated within 9 months. That's not something we've ever required of anybody. So that would be very new. Slopes, talking about erosion control methods, be provided by an approved engineer, including without limitation sediment traps, small dams, and barriers, shall be used during construction and site development to protect water quality, control soil erosion, and control the velocity of runoff. Again, vegetation remaining undisturbed as much as possible. And that grading shall not alter the natural contours of the terrain except as necessary. So just limiting a little bit of that overall change or alteration of natural occurring land area, and then drainage. We can work on those standards of approval. We'll have to work on that for everything. But then ensuring that any runoff is designed to deposit into either an engineered drainage system or natural drainage. And then stormwater plan, that's not something we really have addressed before, and it's pretty big. So I don't know if that's something that might be fully out of our scope. But I left it in there as an example. Landscaping requirements, again, there was a lot that was, buffers, things that we don't do, but it did call out that landscaping shall include retention of native vegetation to the maximum extent possible. Is that something that we do call out green space quite a bit in our code, and natural vegetation? So maybe just better clarifying that retention of native vegetation is a desired effect of when development's happening, is that there's a desire to keep it to the maximum extent possible. I love your guys' feedback on that. The fill standards in here seem like that could be beneficial, that if people are filling in property, that there are standards for that. And then 1866080 site plan. Really, to me, this was like, this is what we want on your drawing. And there are some, new things on here, and so please review it, because it may, be excessive, or maybe there are things that really would be beneficial. But for instance, there is existing site features and conditions, including topography, drainage streams, water bodies, wetlands, lines of mean high tide, storm berms, areas prone to erosion, and general location of vegetation. If we're talking about site development, it seems like that would be beneficial. Elevation drawings. We do that to an extent with height already, but just, better clarifying that. Precise location of existing and proposed structures is an existing requirement. Access is an existing requirement, but we don't require arrows indicating vehicular traffic patterns into and out of the site and to all parking areas. But I don't know that that's a bad thing to have that on there to see how people are coming in and out, but maybe it's just not a necessary thing, and we just need to worry about driveway. On-site traffic and pedestrian circulation systems, and a detailed parking plan. I don't know that that's necessary. Pedestrian access to adjacent public lands, waterways, walkways. Again, that's beyond what we've done at this point, unless there's a reason why that would make sense. Grading and drainage plan indicating all cuts and fills and areas of disturbance. The plan shall display elevation changes and cut and fill quantities. Seems like that would be very applicable when we're talking about excavation and fill projects. And then the location of the site in relation to other existing uses on neighboring properties. I like this one because we are always printing off maps when we get building permits so that we can have that location available. And so I think that that's great to call that out. Is yes, we have your site plan, but we also need a map that shows the area and where your property is within that area, because that really helps. And then also lastly is that visibility at intersections, which is interesting because we have that in our code in every single district. So potentially this could clean up that code language a little bit and remove them out of other districts and keep it under site development as an entirety for the whole area, and just making that a little bit cleaner. So a lot of work still to be done, and would love to hear your guys' feedback if you have more.
I have a little bit of feedback. I know there's kind of excessive things is what you're talking about, but if there was a larger development that had a parking area on it, you would want to have this kind of information. So it's kind of the bigger developments would require more information than this, just a residential use. So I don't know if you need site plan A for residential, B for commercial, has different requirements.
Making notes.
This is Randy. The other, since we're going to be working on the comprehensive plan, you know, how we might right size the way we regulate things in this permitting and so forth. There might be an opportunity to ask questions as we're interacting with the public, like what with the community members, you know, what is it that's important to them, you know, is you know, so that when development happens, what concerns do people have and what do they think might be helpful? So we're not over regulating things, but we're not under regulating things.
Excellent suggestion. I will pass that along to Alaska Municipal League, as they're leading the discussion here next week, and see if they can incorporate that in their notes and their topics. Okay. So then I also did provide a really rough building permit update, and that is in the laydown, and it includes that site development standards. And again, you know, the as-bilt's on there, so we can adjust that, and building elevations on there, as well as the slope development standards and stormwater. So making those adjustments where to be right size, but still very, very rough. So I can use your guys' feedback and work on both of those documents and then bring them back at the August meeting. And then also hopefully any feedback we get from the community.
Yeah, that sounds really helpful. Are there any other comments from the commissioners? And Madam City Manager, are you at this point? Does that conclude your presentation?
It does.
Okay. Thank you so very much. And then the next agenda item is staff report.
Point of order,
sorry.
Madam Chair. Did you want to
Yes.
ask for public comments?
Oh, thank you so much. Do we have any public comments?
I'm not seeing any hands raised at this time, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So we'll go ahead on to the staff reports. And will the city clerk be doing that?
Sure. So under staff reports, the first one we have is the upcoming open commission business. You recall these are just kind of the stuff we're trying to keep on the radar. Cedar Street extension, we're still working and talking to the property owners to see if they can come to a consensus on a plan to move forward on that. And I don't know if you want to talk about City Manager Gagel about the comprehensive plan update.
Sure. Thank you, Clerk Diamond. So there is in your laydown a flyer that was created by Alaska Municipal League for an open house next Wednesday, July 9th at 6 p.m. at the Sea Otter Community Center. Light refreshments will be available, and it will be led by Alaska Municipal League, so a third party coming in and helping hopefully lead this discussion in the community. It will be very open discussion, and with I think there are initially thinking about maybe some tables set up with different content on it and being able to circulate through the room and talk with different people and get their input on the various elements of the plan and what that future looks like. They wanted to make sure that it was open and friendly for kids. So that if there are parents or guardians, individuals that are not able to access these types of events sometimes because of children, that those children are welcome and activities are available. Because this will not be online. It'll be interactive. So the hope is to have people be there in person and have it be welcoming. And of course, we'll at the Seattle Community Center is next to the park. So that could be another great outlet. But really the desire is to have as many people there as possible. So please help spread the word. And please come and attend and provide your input on what that future for Seldovia looks like.
Thank you. And for item C, their planning website and updates are ongoing. You'll see in the next couple of weeks. Next week, probably there'll be a page for the long-term residential permits and a short little blurb on the CB district. I guess it's still commercial business district for the moment. And so moving on to the building permits to date, we had 12 total. There's still 2 open from 2025. And there's probably at least 1 or 2 letters that are going to go out for people who don't have building permits at the moment. And so I'll turn it over back for the city manager's update unless anybody has any questions on those upcoming open commission business.
Madam City Clerk, on the upcoming open commission business, could you also add the abatement public nuisance code? And I think you had also mentioned the administrative hearing officer potentially being added to the code as well.
Yep, I can definitely keep those on the open and upcoming commission business. The abatement ordinance was presented in a commission report at our last June city council meeting, and there's going to be, I believe it's going to be scheduled for the work session for the city council on July 14th. So that's where that abatement ordinance stands right now, just for the commission's information.
I may interject then now with this commercial business district ordinance being recommended back, that would be a great space to hold that work session prior to that July 14th, if that works for the council schedule, and be able to talk about both those planning documents.
And if you'd like, Madam Chair, I can give just a short update on the BOA hearing. Just so the for the rezoning appeal, the Board of Appeal did uphold that decision. So they did deny the appeal. That decision went out on June 20th. And there is 30 days for the appellant to appeal to the Superior Court according to our code. So that is where that stands right now. That full hearing and decision can be seen on our website as well.
Thank you.
And if you'd like me to move into a city manager's update, I can provide that next for you unless there's anything further. Notice.
Yes, please. Thank you.
I'll give you guys a little bit of a preview for the city manager's update that will be provided at the July 14th regular city council meeting. And of course, it's always moving as things are updated. But at this current time, I just wanted to let you guys know that the environmental review process for the Jackaloff Bay dock is wrapping up. All of the Section 7 requirements were completed. So that's approvals from US Fish and Wildlife, from NOAA, just the different various national agencies. So those have all been approved, and now the environmental assessment is being finished. It's a a document with all of that information in there. And then that will go to MARED mid-July for their review, as well as we're in the process of negotiating and discussing the draft grant agreement. So those kind of go in tandem. And once the EA is approved by MARED and the draft agreement is approved by both parties, then that grant will be signed. And then we'll be able to issue an RFP for the construction of the Jackoff Bay Dock. However, it's still a while out. I know. It seems like it should be here any day, but with that, RFP is the float installation, or sorry, for the float manufacturing, and that's about an 8-month process, we're being told. So get the RFP out, get the floats manufactured. Typically, that manufacturer would also be the same manufacturer of the pilings, and then those pieces all come up together on a barge and installation, hopefully next summer. So that's exciting. We had a smaller grant to order a generator for this building, a new generator, and it is here. So that's very exciting. We'll look at getting that hopefully installed in the next couple of months, and with a new automatic switch, so that in future power outages, we still have capabilities of running senior meals in the library, and there's some fire and EMS services that depend on it. For instance, the doors, which is what the generator runs right now, is the automatic opener for the bay doors. So just an upgrade overall for the building. That's very exciting. Additionally, for this building, we're replacing the toilets in Seldovia space. We also had another grant for some stormwater inlet repairs in Main Street. We're working with DOT, hopefully, to have permission to be able to complete that and to place new culverts in Vista Avenue and Frank Raby, as well as to purchase a pickup broom. So we purchased a pickup broom attachment for the loader so that we can provide more frequent street sweeping, and hopefully help keep those storm drains a little bit clearer. So just thinking of the life of that stormwater system, and just having a little bit better maintenance on it. Again, another thing we're working with DOT on, as it hasn't been verified yet, but there's a thought that those drains, again, on Main Street are probably state drains, and then the ones within the neighborhoods are city. But we're working through that process with DOT. At the request of the city council, the Seldovia City dock, or municipal dock, is now locked when it's not in active use. That shouldn't hopefully prevent people from being able to still walk out there. It's a little cumbersome. You have to, climb under the gate or through it. Looking at ways of maybe doing like a little man walk through area. It's good. That's going to take a little bit of work. But just preventing that drive on access, if not an active use for that area. The 4th of July is Friday. So, city has completed the permitting, and we're moving all of the stage material and tents and everything, that we normally move, extra trash cans and such, tomorrow morning. And I think the chamber did a call out for volunteers to help set up tents and stage at 10 a.m. So if anybody's interested in helping set up with, help with setup or takedown, I'm sure they would love assistance with that. Overall, it seems to be going well. There was not a coordinator this year for the chamber, so it's been a little bit of a lift from the businesses in the community, but people are stepping up and helping out, and the schedule looks great. I saw it being passed out today, so if you haven't had a chance to see it, it's online and it is around town. I am sad to report that Allison Ryan has resigned her position as the groundskeeper for the city of Seldovia after the 4th of July. So she will be moving back on to not employed by the city.
Yeah, it can vary.
And we've appreciated everything she's done to keep the city looking really great and running sharp. So thank you, Ms. Ryan. We received an invitation to submit a full proposal for the NIFWIF, which is the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. We submitted we submitted a request for a proposal for one project, and that was a wetlands assessment for our area, in conjunction with the KBNR, that's the Kachemak Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve. And we've been working with them quite a bit lately on a few different projects. For instance, the dam project that Seldovia Village Tribe submitted to do an assessment on the Fish Creek Dam and whether that is still viable, needed, or if that dam could be removed. So then they also are helping us now submit a full proposal for this NIFWIF project, and it's expanded. I went on a great site visit with our Public Works operator, Amanda Miller, to Homer. A few weeks ago, we were invited to a site tour of the Homer Reservoir and the Homer Water Treatment Plant to talk about the work that the KBNR has done in those areas with that Bridge Creek watershed. Pretty amazing data that they were able to collect and now make available to the individuals utilizing those resources to help make better informed decision making, and including drainage maps and recharge maps, and just talking about what those water quality looks like and the water, all things watershed. So we've expanded the project to do an assessment of our watershed here, and looking at both the reservoir watershed and the Fish Creek watershed area, as well as the wetlands in the community, and making an assessment in order to provide recommendations for management of those properties, whether that's, keeping them in perpetuity and having some conservation easements on them, allowing, minimal or full development on them, whatever that looks like, and just to have a better handle on the hydrology of our area. So working on that full proposal right now is due July 17th. It's pretty exciting opportunity, and I hope we get it. And then there's some really neat people to work with, some pretty cool resources. I think regardless, some of those individuals who completed that hydrology study in Homer do intend to come here at the end of September and just do an initial walk around, check it out, see what that potential is and what that work required would be if that moves forward. So if you're interested in that, let me know. That could be a great way to get some additional information on potential projects or that project moving forward. We did put out a flyer about Seldovia road safety, Seldovia Road Safety Matters flyer in the community, trying again to support our VPSOs in this process as we educate and make hopefully a better awareness that road safety really does matter in Seldovia. We, there are regulations. Kids need to be 14 or older to ride ATVs or four-wheelers on the roads, and they have to have a permit, and they need to be wearing a helmet for four-wheelers. They need to be 16 or older to be able to drive a car. You need to be licensed and have insurance and registration. And for speed limits are a requirement, and hand signals, and just some of those things that have seemed to be disregarded lately. So if you have or note that, it's really encouraged that you call immediately when it's happening, because that's more effective, and let those VPSOs know of that occurrence so that they can hopefully address that matter. I know that they've been doing a lot of talking to parents and community members lately. And so hopefully that's making a difference. And encourage people, yes, if you're seeing those unsafe behaviors, please let our VPSOs know. I would also like to note there's been a question regarding electric scooters, the scooters that kids can or people stand on and that drive. Those, if they're under 25 miles per hour, are considered the same or have the same regulations as a bicycle. So anybody can ride them. There's not an age restriction on it. Kids should wear helmets, but they can go anywhere a bicycle can go. And then electric bikes actually have their own state regulations. And I can share that document, but it is similar to an ATV or a four-wheeler. And some municipalities, are expanding that those electric bikes, like municipality of Anchorage, expanded it so that they could go on the trails, and to allow it to be a little bit more lax for bike rentals. That's kind of big. We saw it in Washington, D.C. and I know Dallas, I think it's pretty big. But anyways, not to spin off on that. Road safety matters. Please encourage individuals to practice.
I've been thinking I need to talk to DOT or somebody about it. It would be, I think, a great addition to have a sign that says 15 miles an hour when pedestrians are present on Anderson Bay Road, because it gets a lot of pedestrian use.
So I have been in conversation with DOT also about these concerns. I have a pedestrian counter, which is a machine that counts pedestrians coming. It's going to be shipped to Anchorage, and then I need to find somebody to pick it up and bring it down, just so that we have that data of how many pedestrians we have in the community. We did request, we sent an invitation to have a traffic safety engineer come and be in Seldovia and do a study of the area. However, right now, they are on travel restriction, so none of the state employees are traveling. So we have to wait for that to be lifted to see if that's able to happen. But pedestrian counter is coming, and they're going to help me install it over the phone, and we'll get started on that part of the conversation at least. The city council did request that they consider addressing the speed limit on Main Street and lowering it. The feedback I received is that there are better countermeasures out there, and that's why why it was suggested to invite that traffic engineer here. And so hopefully we can follow up on that conversation, and maybe there are some things other than just lowering the speed limit. So, which is the initial request of council. So, ongoing conversation. I'll let you guys know what we hear back. There is a city council vacancy. If anybody is interested in being appointed to city council for the remainder of this election year, so that would be until the first week of October. See Liz, City Clerk Diamond. She has an application packet. I think that deadline is, do you remember?
It is July 22nd.
Okay. To put in a declaration of interest for city council seat. So let us know if you're interested, or, spread the word if anybody else is interested to come and see Clerk Diamond. Pressure washer is still down, and we'll trying to get an electrician over, and really that's kind of the highlights. So Unless you have any other specific questions, I'll leave it at that. Yes.
You said you needed help to set up a tent or something for the festivities on the fourth?
Yes, so the 4th of July event, normally the chamber sets up tents and the stage. But it's sometimes difficult to find volunteer help. So they did a call out for volunteers if people are interested.
You just,
10 a.m. tomorrow, send them down to the harbor.
Son
I'll ask him.
Perfect.
Mike likes doing this.
I have one little question. When you're talking about Jackaloff, you talked about MARAD or something like that. Some acronym.
Yeah.
What is that?
Excellent question. So that is the Maritime Administration.
Oh, okay. And they're overseeing.
Yes,
everything.
they're part of the US DOT and they are overseeing the funding for that project.
And so I imagine the EEA has included the core is always a big stumbling block or
Yeah.
you have to jump through.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're not actually as big of a jump as some of the other guys. Interestingly, they were willing to go along with what the other agencies said. They wanted to go last. They said if the other agencies approve it, then
Yeah.
So the permitting is still out with them, but we anticipate getting that back soon. At least the things that were required for MARAD are complete.
Okay.
So they got, already an architect plan already done, all that stuff done. huh?
Yes, we're at 95% design and engineering for that facility. We can't be 100% until it's signed off by MARAD, and then it'll be 100% design and engineering. So things are moving ahead slowly but surely.
Well, how about the water line project you'd mentioned last time? Is that still the one coming off?
Oh, thank you. I'll make a note of that on here too. Yes, the raw water transmission line has been awarded the
Okay.
funding for that project, and right now we are in the process of having our request for proposals approved for a design build project. So we're requesting the firm that comes in to either subcontract or have capabilities with engineers in-house to provide that engineering for that project. And then they'll do a bypass line and then remove that old line, put a new line in, and hopefully then that will prevent future problems for a few generations to come. So that RFP should be coming out, I'd hope in the next month, depending on how smoothly the review. That was something that's through the Environmental Protection Agency, and that was something that they required is that they sign off on any solicitation advertisements before they go out. So waiting on that review process.
So that work won't actually happen till next year or winter, maybe.
It really, would
Yeah.
depend on the qualifying firm's deadline,
Yeah.
timeline.
Right. Okay, that's happening.
Oh, and we did receive a community development block grant for the fuel and lube roof replacement project. So that's also something that we're working through.
Oh, the fuel tanks?
No, the
Oh.
fuel and lube building, the retail
building?
building is a city building. So we will be replacing that roof in the near future.
Oh, the roof. Okay.
And I'm sure there's more I'm forgetting, but those are the highlights.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll go to item I, informational items not requiring actions. I think we talked about the comprehensive plan update and the meeting. Was there anything else about that anyone wanted to cover? Are we good?
Please encourage people to attend in the community. There's Facebook posts and flyers to share. And if there's anybody you think needs to be an email sent to, we can do that as well.
Thank you. Any comments from the public?
Not seeing any hands raised, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any comments from the commissioners?
Pretty informative meeting, actually. That's all I got.
Thank you. Anyone else? And just thank you to everybody, commissioners and staff for all the work. It's pretty amazing. And then our next meeting will be on August 6th. And our last item is a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
And a second.
I'll second that.
And I guess and that's it, right? We can adjourn at this point.
Seeing no objection, we can be adjourned.
Are there any objections? Hearing none, we are adjourned. It is 7:43. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thanks for the help in getting connected.